Hi everybody, I'm Gary Adcock. Welcome to Filmscape Chicago. Today we're going to be talking with Al Collins, Panavision lens specialist, and online in California we have Jay Holben from the ASC. He's waving air, and we're going to talk about the art of tuning lenses. And this is an interesting subject because a lot of young directors of photography and a lot of people who've come up as owner-operators don't really deal with somebody as talented as Al, who's been my lens guy for a few years. But before we start, Al, Panavision has a long history of optical inclusion, building optics for other people. We were going to do a PowerPoint, but we decided to kind of let go with it. Talk to us about some of the history of Panavision and their technology with optics and how they've been so fundamental in our industry for building this technology.
Well, for just about 70 years, Panavision has produced lenses and cameras for the film industry. We have the luxury in the fact that we only lease our gear. So anything we have, we can recreate, we can modify, we can change at will to help the cinematographer with his vision. We've been able to do that from the beginning, and we continue to do that today with the newer sensors as opposed to film. We've been able to change with that and allow cinematographers a better means with which to tell their stories. Film was a drastically different medium than the film or the digital sensor is. Digital sensor picks up more information than film because film was a poor medium. It ended up having to have an internegative and an interpositive. Those generational changes added or subtracted from the resolution or the MTF of the lenses or what the lens could put on the film. Therefore, there's been a sea change with regard to with lens technology. Lens technology had been marching forward and trying to get better MTF over the period that film was in use. And then all of a sudden, now you don't need that as much. You don't need that unless you have it for a specific project. What's old is what's new is the saying that comes to mind. You ended up having older lenses that didn't resolve as well, that had many aberrations that you could change or that changed over time, but now those have become very desirable traits. So now we can not only take older lenses and conscript them into new cinematography, but we can also modify our lenses to allow the cinematographer to have whatever aspect he's trying to hone in a lens. So different aberrations, you can have spherical aberration, you can have field curvature, you can have astigmatism. There are color chromatic aberration. There are 7, and we can tune them in or tune them out as we need.
Well, and with a 70-year history, that means you have all the optics that everybody is now converting. Panavision owns all the optics that everybody is now converting to new lenses, and I find that really interesting. But this 70-year history, it also includes large format. I mean, people forget that a whole lot of large format came out of the efforts of the early days of widescreen when they were shooting 65, 70 millimeter masters, and trying to do that and then cropping edge to edge. And then that technology, which was large format in the day, then became what were the advances in anamorphics, allowing to put a wider field of view on a smaller image plane. And those are all things that Panavision has set standards for that the industry still follows. While there are other companies that did that, the one name stands out in the history of film and television, and that's Panavision for the level of optics that they have.
That's true. I mean, we have when we first started, our anamorphics were what we did. I mean, that's how we put our name on the map. Anamorphics, it started out in theaters. We created lenses to allow projectors to put on an adapter onto their existing lens, and then all of a sudden now you have 2:3:5 or 2:4:0 ratio that you can have out of film, which obviously doesn't support that ratio, not unless you crop. But in any event, now we have large format, 8K. Other companies have done 65. Aeroflex has a 65 camera, which they lease, and they use our lenses on their cameras because our lenses do well with that. It's do well with the sensor, they do well on film. So we're back here.
Well, and it also shows, there's shows like The Mandalorian that use primos and things like that. So there's Panavision glass is actually really ubiquitous across the industry at the very high levels. But really what this whole session is about is talking about that technology is unknown to a lot of people. I mean, you and I have had a relationship for a long time. I know Jay has dealt with many cinematographers. And it's an interesting aspect because people don't think of having to talk to their lens person. Jay, you've got a lot of history in all of this. Why don't you chime in some of the points that you want to bring in on this and the history of all of this?
Be here for a long time. I've touched on it already. Panavision, since their inception, was instrumental in cinematography and optics, starting from the our projection lenses into photographic lenses. And set the standard. And still what every company is preaching towards the Panavision look in their anamorphic lenses. You talk to any cinematographer, they're going to talk about, oh yeah, I want anamorphic, but I want the C-series look. Or a little bit later than the C-series, but everything kind of goes back to that standard because as artists, we grew up with the cinematographic anamorphic look that was established. For me personally, it's films like Blade, Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That sets the look of this quality of imagery and that.
Well, and it's also about the large format aspect that everybody talks about now. They talk about Alexa LF and Venice and DXL and Reds, and there's all these models of large format cameras. But you go back to the dawn of film, and 65 and 7mm film was pretty well used in the day. Ben-Hur, you got a lot of major of the early widescreen pictures that were done in large formats because there was no other way to deliver that kind of content to a screen until anamorphics came.
Well, it's interesting when you do at history of pictures. Widescreen was experimented back at the origins of the motion picture. There were 55mm and 70mm negatives back in the early 1900s. So right at the edge of motion picture, they're experimenting larger and larger. Then we settled on the 35mm standard, but there have been waves of experimentation in the 20s and 30s that were pushing for larger formats. And then again in the 1950s, they were pushing for larger formats. And now in the 2000s, we're pushing for larger formats. And again, it's competing with other elements. In the 1950s, it was trying to get people back into the theaters because of the economic state and also because of television. And we're seeing the same thing in the 2000s. We've got a lot of people staying home. 2020 aside, that's beside the point. But we got bigger screens at home, we got higher resolution at home, we got more home theaters, and people are trying to increase that experience. So, for what makes cinema special is the large spectacle, and that's part of the reason why people reach for large format.
Yeah, we all long to go be back in theaters watching true film again in theaters. And it's like, it's one of the things that those of us who work in the industry really feel towards that. But let's have a discussion on some of the other parts of this because, this is important because now there's this generation of cinematographers that have never had a discussion with a lens technician. And you're at the Chicago office here, and it's important for people to understand that this is a conversation that's the same kind of conversation you have with your doctor or your lawyer. You ask different kinds of questions than you normally would, and that's kind of interesting. What are some of the things that
I differ with you on that.
Really?
Yeah, because I think with Panavision, we have lens discussions all the time with our clients. They tell us, I like the way this lens looks. I mean, it could be a K35, it could be super Baltar. And we can say, well, those lenses, they're very good, but they're sometimes in short demand. We might not be able to get a hold of them. can we work another way and do this? And that's where detuning lenses comes in, because then we can really hone down on the look that the cinematographer wants.
And just be clear, everybody, we're not going to talk about the actual process of detuning at all, because we think it's an art form unto itself. So I'm not going to ask any questions to that. I just wanted to set that level of expectation before we get too far into the session. This is not about the technical aspect of doing it. It's not a technical session. It's about the art form and the kind of discussion you have with another cinematographer.
Like, for instance, we have not Redline, but what's the other feature that or the other show that we did was Mixtape, and or actually, I'm sorry, it was the Redline.
Uh-huh.
And what ended up happening is Manuel Bittler, cinematographer for that show, he did the pilot, and he wanted our super speeds, which are great. They're great lenses. They're more of a vintage look because they have many different aberrations. I'm not going to go into all of them here, but what they do nicely too is they have a great bouquet. They have a perfectly circular bouquet that people really like. When you're looking at a bouquet and you say, oh, well, that's really circular, it's probably a super speed lens. Our super speed. And any event, he couldn't get all the focal lengths he wanted. Mm-hmm. So what did we do? We modified more contemporary lenses, the Panavision Primo series, and we fit in all of the focal lengths he wanted to use. And that worked really nicely. He got what he wanted, and we continued on after he left, when he did the pilot, with Kira Kelly, and it was a really great relationship between cinematographer and...
Well, and that's the important part about this. And Jay, chime in here if you have anything, but it's like, this is the important part about it, is it's a discussion between people. Just like you talk to an art director or an artist or the actor, you still have to communicate to the other people in the crew. And somebody like you who can fill in the blanks in an array of optics that solve problems, that's just as important a discussion as it would be to determine what the set's going to look like or how you're going to light something.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think with what we can do with lenses, it's almost like when you have an unforgettable character developed by an actor, and you could never see that film with someone else playing that role. I think it's the same is true with the lenses that frame every shot.
Jay, I'm interested to see your opinion on this. As a producer, director, you're not really known as much of a camera guy as much as the other parts of the production aspect of it, but you're really well known. Your knowledge base on all of this is quite robust, even for somebody like Al and I. So how do you see this changeover, and why all of a sudden people are going for the old fast glass, the Canon Dream lens from Zack Snyder and Army of the Dead, because that was just on Netflix and everybody saw that, and it's like, ooh, I have to go buy a lens from the 50s. Panavision already has those. What is everybody else doing?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, you warmed my heart by saying that I'm more known as being a director and producer, because I kind of struggle with that. And it seems like most people still recognize me as a cinematographer, which was, my past career. And somewhat embarrassingly, I do openly admit this, that as a cinematographer, my lens knowledge was very limited. I was a Panavision guy. And so my lens knowledge was mostly super speeds, ultra speeds, and I could never afford the primos. That was pretty much what I did. And it was actually, some early, almost a decade ago, a session with Guy McVicker from Panavision in Hollywood that really turned my brain around and realized, holy malarkey, I know nothing about lenses. And I started a whole experimentation into learning a lot more, which led into the ASC Lens Committee, and which led into this book that we're working on with Christopher Probst. And so what I kind of see in answer to the other question you just asked is in my career, when I was shooting film as a DP, it was mostly trying to get the sharpest and best contrast lens that you could, or the fastest lens that you could. And those were really the options, kind of dependent upon what you were doing. The idea of the lens implying a character into the image was kind of foreign. There were some DPs who understood that, but it wasn't really commonly understood until the digital age. And like Al said a little bit earlier, because we're not dealing with the iterative, destructive properties of film negative to interpositive to internegative to print, we're dealing with straight lens performance to a digital sensor. We're starting to see, wait a minute, okay, too crisp and too sharp, it is a little distracting. We want more of that feel of what film gave us. And we can reach to older lenses that don't perform as well as newer lenses and get that kind of character. So, I'll try to unpack all of the things that you tossed out there, but one of those is, Panavision has an extraordinary wealth of lenses. They have made optics one of their signature aspects. And as a guy who's attempting to catalog the history of optics, Panavision is a little frustrating because pretty much since their inception, they have custom-made lenses for cinematographers when they need it. One of the most famous was in 1962, creating the Mirage lens for Lawrence of Arabia, a custom 450mm lens that was only used once. It was used once on one film, and I think only one or two shots. So there's this custom lens that was created by Panavision. That's just one of the examples of tons of them that are out there. Asking what other companies are doing, because cinematographers are leaning more towards more character in their images, they're leaning more and more towards vintage lenses that don't have the contrast reproduction or the resolution or the aberration correction that modern lenses do. They have more of that character built in. And there's a great trend that's happening of taking lenses from other camera systems, from still cameras or video cameras or large format still cameras, and modifying them to work in cinema cameras so that you are able to choose the character that you want and imply that in the image. Just what Al said, it's just like an actor's performance. That lens becomes a huge character in storytelling, visual storytelling. The other frustrating aspect for me with Panavision is they have perfected this tuning system so they can make an existing lens pretty much look like anything. So while we're all trying to study and figure out what lenses have what character, Panavision says, nah, we can make it. What character do you want? We can make it look like that. Well, okay, great. You're the magicians.
Well, but it's not that they're magicians, it's just they've got 70 years of practice. And everybody else is playing catch up. And you look at the companies that did it before, the Claremonts and some of the other ones that were there, Kerner Camera, Able does it. A lot of companies have done lens modifications. But this process now of manufacturers turning lenses out that could be modified. The Tribe 7s from Blackwing, the new Optimo Primes from Ingenue, because it's like, sorry, I drew a blank on Ingenue, it happens. But it's one of those things that people don't think about, the fact that now that you can customize these lenses, why would you do it? And it's brings a whole new level of consistency with it. Everything that the new manufacturers are doing, Panavision's been doing for decades. But the difference is not everybody has access to a guy like him. While there's Panavision offices all over the world, there's not one in every city in North America. And if you're in Oklahoma City or somewhere out in the West, or you're in a part of Africa or somewhere else, you may not have access to Panavision like we do. And then you have to think about this idea of tuning lenses. But the things that people do are talking about adjusting how flares look, adjusting how close focus looks. I mean, it's not really a range of mystical items that happens. It's just understanding what the technology is and allowing somebody to modify it in such a way to create that look, which is what Panavision's been doing.
It's part of what attracted me to the world of lenses, really, is that it's a perfect hybrid between science and art. there's hard science to everything that is happening in optical design and in tuning lenses, but there's also sort of a magical voodoo, and it's not easy for companies to do this and do it well and do it right and do it repeatedly. So yeah, there's a lot of companies that are doing tuning of lenses, but it's not always the right result, and a lot of it is hit or miss and kind of struggling because there's this intangible aspect to it.
Yeah, the hit or miss aspect, kind of like anamorphics. Because anamorphics, you and I have had long discussions on anamorphics, but you find two that do the exact same thing you want them to do that aren't a brand new anamorphic from somebody else.
Right.
So
it's a difficult, it's difficult for manufacturers to have something that is tunable and that can get to the point that that the DP really wants. I mean, the look that he wants. I mean, it's with what we do. We can ask you. We can say, hey, how? We can have a whole dialogue with, oh well, what is it that you're looking for? Where did you see this kind of look before? How can we, tune this to what is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for more like soft at the edges? Are you looking for just like an astigmatism? What is it that you're really looking for?
explain what you mean to astigmatism in a lens so that people understand that. I mean, I have astigmatism, so I understand what that means. So, but everybody listening might not.
It's when you have like one part of the frame is going to be the sharpest, and you're going to fall off, depending on where that astigmatism lies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's we can do it, and we can allow we can allow cinematographers to use this to their benefit. But Jay may be right, and there's some it's pushed to such a degree. I think it depends on what it is that the cinematographer is doing it for. I think a lot of what we do now is almost like a gamification, almost, in that we are allowing for imperfections and defects, let's say flares or astigmatism or field curvature, to seep into the image in order to have a more real reality.
Organic feel. Yeah.
I think that it's more akin much to, a lot of times, to how we see things as humans, as opposed to what it is that an imager sees, a sensor. So we take a lens and we give the cinematographer his vision, and that's really it's difficult to do in a way that you can it's repeatable. And because what is repeatable? What is it that you're looking for? Is this? I mean, we can say, oh well, you can look at this footage and you can say, oh well, this footage here, this is a 10 of what we can do. We've pushed this to the limit with what we can do. But so where do you want it? You want it, this is 10, this is 0. Where do you want it to be? I mean, but I mean, when you get a tunable lens, it hasn't been defined yet as to whether how tunable lenses that are on the market are going to affect the market. I mean, are they going to be able to like mix and choose? Is there a menu that they can mix and choose and make the lens look that they want?
Well, and the consistency aspect of it is always a big deal. Can you tune the lens? Can you take it back to manufacturing if it's with somebody else? I mean, you have the technology, Panavision has the technology to return a lens back to its original state, whether you want to. Do some DPs have a library of lenses they come back to all the time, or specific tweaks that they do?
I think that there are some, I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name, that Chaz Shelton, and he's used lenses on what was formerly called mixtape, but we know as soundtrack now, and he also used something similar on when he was working on Homecoming with Julia Roberts. They were both anamorphic productions, and we did similar things to the lenses. So, but that was his look, but I can't guarantee you that he's going to never use that again.
Well, and it comes to that, Jay, because you know that, and it's like, some people think that you tune lenses only because you want to have, it needs to be an old-time look, or it needs to be something else, and it's like, well, you could tune lenses for science fiction and make them sharper and more neutral. I mean, there's lots of different things that you can do that actually drive the look as much as anything else does.
Absolutely. It's a completely wide open palette that is dependent on the story and the individual storytellers, how they want to show that. In most cases, in my experience, you're looking at tuning to reduce the performance of the lens. You're either reducing its handling of flare, its handling of contrast, its handling of resolution, its handling of stereochromatic aberration, its handling of flat field. You are reducing the performance of the lens when you're tuning it. So you start with the lens at its manufacturer best, and then you start to refine down. A rental house like a Panavision, when they get a new lens, will optimize that lens and tune it to be its best performance, right? But that's not necessarily what the creative choice is. The cinematographer's going to look at that lens and say, okay, this is great. I love the contrast. I love the resolution. Can I get just a little bit of fall off just on the edges? I just want like a little softening. And that's where the tuning comes in. It says, okay, so let's give you a little bit of field curvature on that. I think it's extraordinary. It's the same type of tool that goes into filters. Why does a cinematographer reach for Chromos or Hollywood Black Magic or an Harrison dot filter? It's a creative tool to help make that image what they want. And now that can be done in the lens.
Well, and they can also creatively build filters to do those kinds of effects. I mean, that's because it was a lot cheaper to do a filter on front of the lens than it was to actually build the lenses to do those kinds of effects. So a lot of times you saw, the old nose wax on the side of the lens to do something and those kind of things because people did that. I mean, I was a still guy. I had a whole bag of UV filters that had different levels of things on them. It's no different. But there were also portrait lenses in the 1800s that were used in the dawn of still photography that only did center focus, because they didn't know how to do anything else. Cost of glass, it was too difficult to make the glass, so.
Yeah, and too difficult to have a complicated optical design. So, really before thin film anti-reflection coating existed and was able to be manufactured and replicated at the late 1930s, early 1940s, optical design had to be incredibly limited to just a few elements, or you would lose so much light and have so much flare that the lens would be unusable. So these older vintage lenses before the 1940s have that kind of simplified optical design, which gives them more character and more applications.
Which is flaws.
It's fun to sit in a creative lens test and watch a director and cinematographer look through lenses and have an optical engineer watching them. Because they will watch the tests and be like, oh, that lens is terrible. Oh, no, that's awful. Nobody could ever use that. And you'll see the director and DP go, yeah, that's the one. And the optical designer will go, what? Wait, I don't understand. But it's not perfect. It's flawed. And we're embracing that flaw as a way to emotionally connect with the audience. Now, I did an American cinematographer story in a film called Sunrise or Sunshine. Danny Boyle directed. Alan Kushner shot. And Boyle talks about flares being the ability to penetrate the screen and reach out into the audience. And I love that idea. That's like we are directly connecting with the audience through the quality of the lens and how it interprets light.
All right.
That's an interesting comment, because I've heard this similar with J.J. Abrams. He said, I want the future to look so bright that it can't be contained on the frame. I want to see stuff coming off the side of the frame so that people want to get to the next scene. I mean, that's those are not direct quotes, but.
And he did so much in Star Trek, the current one.
Exactly.
I mean, there's what, 297 instances of added flares to that. There's, what is it? There's 87 minutes of the movie, of the 200-minute movie, that is flared out to an extreme where they added anamorphic flares. Yeah, but that's a different one. The fact that somebody would willing to do special effects to add flares to a shot to match what was going on in the camera says a lot about the quality of the glass they use.
But going back to what Jay said as well, is that arguably film stock was the flaw previously. Now it's what we see as far as lens characteristics. It used to be the film stock. We were always working the flaws of film stock, and that's why we're trying to make lenses better. You're trying to make them perform even better than they probably could. I mean, they probably should have, because now we've dialed that all back, or there are plenty of instances where that gets dialed back.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, we're dealing with sensor sizes and sensor resolutions now that we never thought about when some of the optics were built. I mean, let's be real honest. Even 70mm film barely matches the resolution of a DXL or an Arri LF. It just can't. It doesn't have that capability. I mean, there's not enough silver halide in there to be able to do it. And that brings up an interesting aspect too, that we're working at such high resolutions that we have to degrade the processing of the image just to be able to view it without scratchy eyeballs.
I've had some discussions with cinematographers that they're afraid of, higher photosite count digital cameras and vintage lenses. Like it won't work. And the truth is that the higher photosite count, the more you're sampling, actually the more character you get out of that lens, the more you see from it. And that's also been a big surprise with a lot of cinematographers, is the difference between film, the same lens used on a film camera, and on a digital camera. You'll see different characteristics. And even from one digital camera to another, you'll see different characteristics of that lens. So it's really important to always test in your specific workflow.
And workflow, by that means lighting and everything. It's encompassing in all of that. It's not just, I'm going to go put it on a projector, or I'm going to go shoot a chart and that's going to tell me everything. That will give you some details, but it doesn't tell you everything about the characteristics of the lens, especially if you start looking at things that are farther out of focus or farther in, near focus than what you would normally want. How do you deal with things like I would need to, this doesn't quite focus close enough for me. Is that like a difficult issue to add for a lot of lenses? I mean, in some of them you can't go too close because of just the nature, you have to rebuild the lens. But
I mean, we've done different fixes for detuning or improving lenses by adding optics or changing what we've done inside, and it's worked. It's allowed guys to get closer. We've had different anamorphic lenses. Typically are not great at close focusing, but we've been able to get closer focusing lenses for more demanding DPs. We've been able to do that. So
one of the other things you brought up about Panavision that I don't think a lot of people think about is that because they don't sell anything, they can use rare earth elements in their glass that no one else can. And this is a big deal. And it's not really a secret, but because they don't sell anything, they have access to glass with higher lead contents, iridium stuff. There's a lot of things that you can do that are relegated by law in many countries, that you can't sell anything that makes that, but that doesn't mean you can buy it or rent it. And they maintain that as an optical shop. They use it as a replacement thing. It's just like restoring a house or restoring a painting. You have to have the elements to be able to put it back to its original place for historical accuracy. And that's an interesting sidebar in all of this, just having the capability and power to be able to do that. Somebody say something. I thought Jay froze for a second. So
I mean, I think.
No, I'm still here. I'm avoiding the politics of that discussion, so I didn't get into it.
Yeah, well, it's not, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but it's something that people need to think about, that gives Panavision a power that other companies don't have. And that's an interesting sidebar in that because of the way they manufacture and stuff, they can still replace lenses that get damaged from their archive. They can actually work from their archive to maintain all of that. And that 70-year history of lenses is a lot of glass. It's got to be a ridiculous
in addition to that, the fact that they don't sell the lenses means that they can modify and they can spend the time to make a custom new series of lenses without worrying about what is the return on investment of making this new series of lenses. So because other manufacturers, if they go down the path of, okay, we're going to make an experiment with this new series, they've got to be able to sell that and manufacture it. Panavision doesn't have to do that. They can say, hey, we're going to take and make this whole new line, and they'll be like, maybe 3 sets of it, and we'll see how it works. And if it does, maybe we'll make some more. If not, okay, fine. That's the strength in not having to, sell their tools, that they get to make extraordinarily unique experiments and products that are really designed specifically for creative vision.
Which is where all this is going, because we're talking about these custom modifications, and that's important because it's like, how many people can afford a snorkel or anything like that, a periscope? There's types of lenses that come out that you use that are available to Panavision that aren't available to anybody else. And it's interesting for me as somebody who has delved in the technical side and the optical side of all of this. For those people who don't know, I'm a glass blower. I actually physically blow glass as a hobby, and it's the weight and design of things I've always fascinated me. And then coatings are a whole nother environment in all of this. I mean, there's the, it's like you were saying, the uncoated lenses of the early 1900s, the more elements you added, the more light you lost. So you ended up losing information that way. Multi-coatings allowed multiple elements of lenses to be together. But now we talk about uncoated lenses. And I kind of laugh at that, because I don't think any uncoated lenses are truly all uncoated anymore.
Of course not. No, when somebody says an uncoated lens, it's generally only the front element or potentially the rear element in which coatings have been stripped, and often it's only one surface.
Right.
If you truly stripped all of the coatings off of all of the elements, the lens would be unusable. There'd be so much flare and so much veiling glare that it would be like looking for a piece of milk glass.
And be 5 stops less than what you had. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but people don't think about that. It's like, you want uncoated, you want this, but you don't realize what that actually means. You're just using a buzzword, and I always found that kind of interesting, is people didn't think about the aspect of what actually involves what they're asking for. And this is an art form. I mean, to me, yes, it's technical. You put screws in places and adjust things in micrometers, but it's an art form what you do. And tuning optimizing a lens, adjusting a lens to someone's specification is a true art form in my idea.
Well, I mean, like Jay and you've alluded to, is that you have a lens, somebody comes in and says, well, I want the flare of this, but I don't want the field curvature of this lens. How can we achieve that? Or can you achieve that? Or, I want, an astigmatism that will, make, the subject be in focus, but everybody else out. Something like that. I mean, do you, how do you achieve that? And then, like, to what degree is more important? It's like you have to, like, we've on many occasions dialed in things, mixtape, I'll go back to that, that's soundtrack actually now, but that show initially started and they really wanted to have a really drastic effect. It was an anamorphic lens job, and we were using T's and G's, and they wanted to have a softening of the edges, and we ended up adding glass to some of the longer lenses, and then the wider lenses we ended up doing some things inside the lens to give it that quality. And initially the DP loved it, but when they brought it to production, they were like, well, let's dial this back a little. So we have to be there for that provision to be able to dial back as well as dial forward. And we have to be able to do that within a couple of days, depending on like how quickly we're getting a crew to prep the gear.
So
there's 2 points to. Oh, sorry, Gary. There's 2 points that are interesting. Some of these lenses that you can buy, have the options of tuning it when you buy it. That's an interesting point that Al just made. Is you're kind of stuck with that. These tunable lenses that are available now from manufacturers aren't something that are really like you buy it and you can adjust it yourself. You have options when you purchase it, and then you're kind of locked into them. If you've gone too far, you're kind of stuck. And there can also be just too many options. How do you know how to choose? You need something like an Al at your side to say, okay, look at this iteration. Now that it's a little bit too much that way, okay, then we can tune it again. It's difficult to do these kinds of things without a company.
Well, and you're disassembling and reassembling your optics. That has to do with the consistency and whether it's repeatable, and what happens is it gets out of alignment when you do that. If you custom modify a lens, personally, if I were to go in and do something to a lens, how do I know it's going to be in line when I get it back? And the custom modification stuff is an interesting part about this. Jay, what's your opinion on some of the lens manufacturers that are doing this? Do you see it as a fad? I've now seen both manufacturers' style of products that are doing this, the Tribe 7s and the Optimos. And I found it real interesting that they came at it from very different points of view. The Optimos seem to be geared very much towards owner-operators. The people that are doing that, whereas the Tribes seem to be done more in a style for rental houses and things. It's designed for a lot more robust duty, just visually. That's not to say that the Optimos are fragile or anything. There's enough sets out there that people know that. It's just it's a process, and it's like, how do we go forward this when we're doing this? I mean, with the other options, because you and I've talked about Zero Optic and some of the other people that do that. I like Alex Nelson and the people there. They've done really nice work for me. But it's one of those things that, where do you see all of this going?
I've had several manufacturers sit down with me over the last couple of years and ask me, what do you want? What do you see the future? What do you want? What's your dream? And for me, it's a lens that is adjustable. So we have focus rings, we have iris rings, and we have zoom rings on a lens. So why not also have a ring on the lens that adjusts spherical aberration? Or can maybe induce or reduce chromatic aberration? That's a little harder to achieve. Yeah. But spherical aberration is something that a lot of people are adjusting when they're tuning. And it's not necessarily that hard of a thing to do and to actually have a calibrated ring on the lens to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Even Panavision has a soft effects lens.
Well, there were soft tars that were built for portrait photographers in the 1800s that did exactly that. You twisted an iris on it and adjusted how much it went out of field. So that technology is more than 100 years old.
Exactly. And we have much better technology to achieve it now. So I think the selection, the menu of options when you purchase a lens is great, but it really comes down to then that tool is great for one job. But the next job you do, it may not be. So that puts the onus on the rental house to be constantly tuning and detuning, or you manufacture a lens that when you get in the field, you can adjust it and adjust it on a per shot basis. Me personally, I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, but I just see the cost of that in the long run and how a manufacturer is going to be able to do that. That's one of the virtues of Panavision, that they've got such a huge library of this that's not an issue. But again, that goes back to it's not available to everybody, and how do people in places that don't have access? Not every place is within 500 miles of a Panavision office. There's a lot of them. They're not that many. So, and that's an important thing to think about is that as we go forward, the people that are owner-operators that are doing their own work in their own cities, these are a viable alternative for them to have that kind of work. You have to find a lens technician to do it. There's guys like Duclos, Abel in the East Coast. There's some really good lens people around that handle things. Zero Optic does the conversion of old still lenses. So there's a lot of places that actually do this around the United States and around the world. TCS in Europe does it. I mean, there's a number of companies that do it. And that's the interesting thing is because we're just trying to open up this concept of this to cinematographers and artists who haven't thought about this as a process. Because this is an important part of the history of filmmaking. And it's important for people to think about that as where we go forward. Because if we're constantly trying to, detune our high-resolution sensor optics to make the image look more filmic, there's reasons why we do that. We have that vision. I will always think of large screen as Ben-Hur and The Robe and the classics of that period, because those were the films that I came up that started with widescreen.
Well, I mean, I think going back to a point that Jay had earlier is testing. I think we invite people into our rental house on a regular basis to test lenses without saying, oh, we're going to detune for you. Mm-hmm. Coming to America too, we had the DP come in and he tested a myriad of lenses that we had on the shelf. And there was we never mention detuning, and he didn't take the lenses detuned. He took a set, but they weren't detuned. I mean, and this is what cinematographers are invited to do. We invite people to come in, we invite them to look at the sensors and of the cameras and see how the lenses match to that sensor and what it is their vision is. And so we can say to them, well, we already have lenses already on the shelf, or worst case scenario, not worst case scenario, but the most difficult would be to detune lenses, but the option does stand out there.
Yeah. Well, and again, it gets back to the library you have is so large. Let's start with what's on the shelf first.
Exactly.
And that's an interesting vibe for people, because there's a lot of people who've only lived with DSLR. They've got a whole collection of Canon EF lenses and they're real happy with them, but they don't think about how those lenses react in cinema as opposed to being designed for still, or any of the other issues you run into.
I mean, we have over 10 types of anamorphic lenses. We have about 14 types of spherical lenses, some of them with different coverages. We can give you whatever you need, and as I said, if it's outside of that, then you just say, well, what is it that you need? And then we can offer it. And that's the difficulty with being an owner-operator, is a lot of times you see yourself as a hammer and everything is a nail. So you end up using the present technology available to you. But I mean, this may offer a boon to, tunable lenses may offer some ability for people to change their look.
Well, and that's an interesting part too, because guys like me who have a whole cadre of 70 series Canon lenses that are quite the opportunity for me right now. It's like, do I really want to get rid of all my still lenses to actually make cinema lenses out of them? Is there anything else out there? And Jay, what's your opinion on all of this as we go forward? Because it's getting to the point where we have to figure out what's happening and where it goes from here.
Well,
so I didn't make you an easy one.
I wish I had a crystal ball, and there's a couple of companies out there right now that are trying to predict the future and see where the next great still lens is, and they're trying to buy them all up so that they have them as an investment, and then jack up the sales on them, like Canon FDs. Canon FDs were they're beautiful still glass, and suddenly it was revealed that Canon FDs were the origins of the K35s, and they went from a couple $100 a lens to thousands of dollars a lens. So where are we going? I think we're in a wonderful world right now where we have an extraordinary variety of options for storytellers, so that you can get any look you want. And if you don't have a Panavision behind you, you have a wealth of glass that can be adapted by a number of companies like Zero Optic or TLS or GL Optic or Van Diamond or any of these companies that are out there that might be able to take that existing lens with a look that you want and adapt it into the world that you need. So I think that's phenomenal. I think the more options that storytellers have, the better, really.
Well, and I want to, as we run to the end of our time here, one of the things I want to bring up is, do you remember when RED cameras came out and all of a sudden you couldn't find super speeds or anything anymore? All of the PL mount lenses all of a sudden became expensive again? And it was like, and that's only 11, 12 years ago now that you know, all of a sudden PL lenses were back in vogue because RED came out. And it, another one of the things it did to change the industry, but I remember having PL lenses and going, wow, I wonder if I'll ever be able to get rid of them. And then in a couple of years, they were worth 5 times what I paid for them.
Absolutely. What that did, specifically the release of the Red 1, is that it made owner of PL mount cameras exponentially larger.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the major lens manufacturers at that time went from a couple hundred clients around the world to thousands of clients around the world. And it put a massive stress and demand on Cine optics and lenses. Not just the Red 1 started it, but then the Alexa, and now you have Canon and Sony and everybody else with PL cameras that are affordable. That's not $250,000 as a barrier to entry to own a camera. It changed the way that things happened in the lens world and also forced manufacturers to be faster. But now, thankfully, we can do it with computer-aided optical design and 3D prints prototyping. We can speed up what used to be a decade to get a new series of lenses into every year, get something new.
So as we close out, we have any questions from anybody in the room here? So we have an audience here. Then in closing out, one of the things I want to ask Al, a Mexican mathematician recently developed a theorem that would allow us to digitally clean up all kinds of aberrations in the lens. And it was approved by NASA and they're actually using it at NASA for some re-engineering of stuff that's already been shot to try and remove aberrations and all that. Is that in our future? Or is this just something we're going to look at and go, no?
I think it's an interesting. I mean, it's. There are lots of things, technological innovations that.
And I don't mean about that. Just to be clear, I don't mean that about camera optics. I mean about just in general. So.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the bigger picture, I don't know. I think it would probably be, you know, there are lots of applications for that. I don't know whether the Cine end is an applicable part. I think that unless you were going back to film and you were trying to clean up what was going on there.
I see restorations and things. What about you, Jay? What do you see there? Is that?
There's some extraordinary things that are happening technologically, from metasurface optics into freeform glass into 3D printing. And I think that's actually really where the next wave of lenses is going to go, is in 3D printing of glass. We're stuck into manufacturing spherical lenses because it's the easiest thing to manufacture. And then we have A-spheres in lenses, but that's harder and more expensive to do and has to be done in smaller runs. If we can 3D print glass in freeform, we can make lighter, smaller, better performing glasses, and it's a technology that's already happening, at least in eyeglasses. It can lead into photographic optics, and I think that's a very exciting thing in the future.
That's an interesting way to detune or tune new optics. So, we started a little bit late. We're about a little run. Do we have any questions? You question? And I just wanted to bring everybody back to front and center on this, because it's really about the artistic vision that it takes for this. And it's understanding that there are people out there that can help you find an artistic vision. I'm lucky enough to have somebody from Panavision who's a good friend of mine. Jay lives out in LA and has access to a couple of Panavision offices out there. But it's also about just understanding where optics are going. You know, I'm really appreciative for Tribe 7 and Ingenue to show me their technologies and let me talk about it a little little bit. I'm not anywhere near an expert on it, and please seek them out for their information. Able, BandPro supply both of those. A lot of manufacturers do. Seek out the information from Tribe and Blackwing, but also go talk to Panavision. You know, if you live in LA, if you live in New York, if you live where there's a Panavision office, go seek them out. They're happy to give their time to let you learn. Jake, close us out.
Oh, good grief. Go out, get some great glass and shoot some great images.
That's it. Al?
No, thanks everybody. Thanks for Panavision for letting this happen. I think it's been a long time coming. I think that detuning has been out there. We've circled around it, but there hasn't really been a lot of presentations on it, and I'm glad to be here to deliver it. So.
And I thank Panavision for their support and their help too, because they reached out to Jason, both Jay and I for this, and we couldn't have done this without Panavision's help and support. Jay Holben, thank you, sir. Always good to see you. Wish you were here. Jay's actually in California on a travel hold for a job. That's why he's not here. He was going to be here and speak at Filmscape and couldn't make it, but he was kind enough to actually call in and let us do this a couple of times, and I'm really appreciative, my friend.
It's fun to be there. I'm sorry I wasn't there in person.
And with that, we close out. Thank you, everyone, from Able Cine and the IFA space in Chicago. This is Filmscape Chicago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jake.
And Guy. Thanks, you, Guy.